Sorry.
I have had several different people recently mention to me, some friends, some clients, that the concept of the world as an illusion is very challenging, and why is it even practical and useful? So I want to clarify from my personal experience how important it was for me and tremendous for me personally to sort of grasp the concept of illusion. Not that everyone needs to do it, just talking about from my perspective, and why it turns out to be quite the therapeutic concept, okay? So we're going to talk about 5 scientific concepts of why the world's an illusion, and 5 spiritual concepts of why the world's an illusion, and why that would be relevant, okay? My personal experience, again, is once I saw it correctly, once I started to visualize some of these concepts, the way I saw the world shifted. And then I could start to see people as more spiritual than physical. I like to say all the time, the concept of illusion can really help people get past all the isms. We no longer need to see what we see in society a lot, all the differences and all the separation that we have because of those differences, and the race and the gender and all those types of things. The concept of an illusion, understanding that can really help get past that, right? And then you see each other from what we really are, spiritual beings, which is absent the gender and the sexual orientation, political affiliation, and all those various things. And now I have a chance to namaste, which is quite literally seeing the light in you only and getting past the physical aspect of things. That's a big part of how it's helpful. So let me go through some of the science first by explaining quickly the difference between what an illusion is and what a delusion is. The illusion itself, most people have the idea that illusion means it doesn't exist, okay? And the actual definition of it is just a deceptive appearance, mostly from a sensory aspect, that your 5 senses aren't perceiving the thing as it actually is. That's what an illusion means. It doesn't mean it does not exist. It just doesn't exist the way we think that it exists, the way we're conditioned to thinking that it exists. A delusion is a deceptive experience, which is to say it's more of a psychological thing. It's more of a belief. When you buy into something that you think is fact and it turns out not to be fact, that's a delusion. And that is very psychological in many ways. And you can see how those two things are distinctly linked in many ways. But the idea of illusion versus delusion is also, again, very useful when we hold on to things that don't exist the way that we think, but we hold on to beliefs that aren't helpful, and they're actually false beliefs. The idea of separation being one of them, high among them, okay? So I'll be bringing both of those words up again several times. So, scientific concepts, starting with the origin of consciousness itself. Now, who are we if we're not our consciousness, right? If our consciousness is outside of our body, or if it's turned off, like when we're asleep, or if you've used a drug or died, whatever, the way we think of consciousness, once it changes, what happens to the body? It's off, in effect, right? Where does the world go when you fall asleep at night, when your consciousness dims down? It basically disappears. And when the body is dead, okay, because there's no longer consciousness in it, the physicality of things is not having an experience anymore. I mean, we are our consciousness. Well, you go back 25 years, these 2 men by the name of Christoph Koch, which is a neuroscientist, and David Chalmers, who's a philosopher, at a conference in 1998, they actually made a bet about the origin of consciousness. Now, Chalmers at that time, he coined the concept, he's a philosopher, the hard problem of consciousness, that it's hard to know its origin. We don't know where or why we're conscious. Where does it come from? And the scientist said, within 25 years we'll know. And he described that there's going to be an underlying neural network that'll be provable somehow, that they're going to find it in the brain, that the brain somehow gives rise to consciousness. And the philosopher said, yeah, I don't think so. At least it won't be clear in 25 years. So they made the bet on whether or not it'll be clearly proven by 2023. So they made the bet over a case of wine. Was what the winner had to lose. The winner it got from the loser had to pay the winner. So 25 years later, 2 years ago now, 2023, they had another conference, and these 2 gentlemen met again. And they talked about all the various issues, and at the end of the conference, the scientist had to pay up and give the philosopher the case of wine because it's still not been proven. Scientists are trying super hard to figure out where consciousness comes from, but it's still a hard problem. And the reason for that, for those of us who are into spirituality, is because consciousness isn't found in the physical realm. It doesn't come from the brain, no more than a song comes from the radio, okay? It might transmit it, but the origin of the song isn't the radio. It's the same sort of thing, and yet we're so used to walking around thinking our consciousness is right here somehow, or it's in our body. And we don't make it primary, we make the body primary. That's like saying the radio is more important than the song. Now, they both work together, obviously, but they're also distinctly different somehow. And that's part of the illusion as well. So these guys have made another bet. The same bet, 25 more years. They'll both be in their 80s or 90s. And they made the same bet. Because the scientist is still pretty convicted, and the philosopher is also still pretty convicted. Well, I'm with the philosopher for sure. I'm a fan of the joke that's been around a long time. You have a team of scientists and a team of philosophers climbing the mountain of truth. And when the team of scientists gets to the summit, they look over and the other side, what do they see? The team of philosophers who got there about 1,000 years before them. Okay? See, the spirit is going to lead the science in the end in many different ways. Science is very useful, but in the end of it, we're going to need some level of faith. Okay? So that's the hard problem of consciousness. We don't know its origin. I don't think we're ever going to know its origin, and yet we experience it. 2, we are made up of atoms. Now, Niels Bohr, who's Einstein's contemporary, really smart guy, he said that which we think of as real is made up of things which cannot be regarded as real. Well, I've drawn it for you here. What a number that is, right? 7, 27 zeros. That's 7 octillion. 7 octillion atoms in your body. Now, if you think of your body, think of it. Body is singular, one thing. You think of your body as one thing, and you recognize you have different parts of the body, but we still think it's one body. Actually, it is 7 octillion little tiny vibrating atoms. And if you pack them together densely, they make up what seems to be a body, but with an electron microscope, you can zoom in on a body, and guess what you're going to see? Not flesh. You're going to see these little vibrating atoms. It's what I describe as Tinker Toys, right? Remember Tinker Toys? You know, the little circles and the little sticks, and you can build things out of them. You could take a box of Tinker Toys and you can make a ship, and then you could take the same things apart and you could make a building, right? You can try to make a football. You could, whatever. The same constituent parts that make the one can make the other. It's not physical anymore. And all the isms, again, disappear there on the level, physical level, of the atom. Because we either look at each other as the physical body, or we could see each other as the 7 octillion atoms. Now try that tomorrow. When you see someone, go, 7 octillion atoms? Hey, 7 octillion atoms, man. You know, try that. You're going to think about the world a little different. And try to visualize it too. Sort of like if you're listening to a song. Can you see the music in the air? No, you know it's a vibration. You can't actually see it. I'm not expecting you to be able to see the music, or see the atoms, or see the 7 octillion, but just the mere seeking of it. Seeking you'll find. And it's not going to be you're going to find 7 octillion atoms. You're going to develop a sense. Like, I'm actually trying to look at this physical body differently. I can look at the world differently too. Because in Tinker Toys, I can take apart the ship and then make a building out of it. Well, guess what? In our experience, this is a tree. By the way, I know I need some art lessons. This is not a very good tree, but it's what it's supposed to be. There's my stick figure human. And these are atoms, individual atoms, of carbon, oxygen, and hydrogen. And scientists have shown us that the tree is made up of 50% carbon, 44% oxygen, and 6% hydrogen. That's a tree. That's wood. Okay? A human body is made up of 19% carbon, 65% oxygen, and 10% hydrogen, and a few other trace elements. Okay? Now, what jumps out at me is that trees and human beings are made up of the same constituent parts. I mean, do you look at your body and think there's an oxygen atom there, there's a hydrogen atom there? You don't think that, okay? And yet you could go touch a tree and you think it's bark and whatever is in there. And yet it's the same constituent parts. If I just reorder this stuff, the joke I make in New Eyes, if I reorder your body and add more carbon and reduce the oxygen, it's Pinocchio, right? It is a little boy of wood. We're made up of the same constituent parts of wood. And you could go throughout the world looking at things. Everything is made up of these little atoms. And do you think of these atoms as flesh? No, all they are, it's a neutron with an orbiting electron around it, and it's just vibration. We're way more like music than we are flesh. In fact, flesh doesn't even exist. It's a complete deception. And when we buy into that, we are being deluded. And yet we walk around thinking of that all the time. Now, this isn't well, it is to minimize it a little, but it's to shift the emphasis over to the spiritual side of things, because there's something much greater going on. So what is it that you see? And it's useful to look at a tree and try to see the atoms too. Again, you're just seeking it out, but you're going to have a different experience of it. So we're made up of atoms, and those things, those atoms themselves, Niels Bohr's super smart scientist said, well, they're not even really real. And yet, well, what does that make you? Not quite really real either. Here's where the illusion fits in. Superposition, one of my favorite scientific concepts. The idea that the world is existing in a state of different potentials. Right? Superposition. It's why I drew the atom like this. That's one electron in all the various places in the orbit around the neutron or the nucleus. That's what superposition is. It's in multiple places at once. And I've done full videos on this, but short and sweet, it's the many worlds interpretation of the world that we're in. Do you think of the universe as one thing, or do you think of it as multiple variations of one thing? Well, it's been long since proven that it's not one thing, and we still call it a universe. Our experience is like that, but there's so many different variations that are possible. And it's, if you've ever played a video game, it's right there. A video game, all the variations of what Pac-Man can do are encoded inside this video game, right? It's certainly one game, but how many variations? And we're not used to looking at the world as all the variations. We're just thinking of it as one world. Well, if you think of it as the variations, now you are an observer inside a game. And it's a way to shift it. When you shift your perception, the game shifts. If I'm playing Pac-Man and I see a ghost over there and I want to run away from the ghost, I'll go that direction. If it's blinking and I can kill the ghost, if that's how that goes, then I might run towards it. My perception matters a great deal. As we get into the spiritual stuff, it's the major difference between love and fear. You know, when you seek love, you're going to have a different experience than when you're experiencing just fear. Not that there's not a role for both, of course there is, but the fact is you're going to now look at it different. Can I perceive this game different? And then will my world shift? That's what superposition is. I literally have a different experience of this game, including looking at my body differently. We'll do that in a minute with time. Now, this is maybe my favorite to get people who are not interested in that kind of stuff, some friends who've never heard any of this stuff, and like, what do you do for a living? Well, I tell people that things don't touch. Okay? That's one thing that I do. I'll fist bump my buddy and I'm like, we didn't actually touch there. What? Plus, you are all levitating on your chairs right now. Highly unlikely you thought of that at all today, or maybe ever in your life, okay? We think we're sitting on a chair and we think our bottoms are touching the cushion, and guess what? No, it's not. It's being pushed up by the forces inside the chair, and gravity's pulling you down, and there's a gap between you and the chair. You've never shook anyone's hand and actually touched them. No lips have ever actually met. Every single experience we're having in the physical world is an energetic interaction. Now, you can just ask AI this and it'll tell you. I did, by the way. I'm curious where AI is with this. And I asked, does things touch? And it says no. It says things don't touch. Now, most people would be blown away by that. You've never touched another human being. Whoa. Okay. And we're always levitating right now. I'm levitating above this floor because the energy of the floor is pushing me up. Now, that's enough to blow people's minds, okay? Now, there are some people that debate that on the level of the photon and the actual interchange of the energy, and that there's a certain kind of touching. That's true, but it's not really physical anymore. If I did fist bump you or shook your hand or whatever, I'd be feeling the energy of you, and my hand picks it up in the nerves, and then I have this experience of it, and I think, I just felt some skin or something like that. But actually you didn't, you felt energy. Again, the whole point is to see the world differently. Nothing has ever touched physically, and yet we're all always spiritually touching. That matters a lot. The way the energy of the world works, entanglement in science, things are always connected. Einstein called it spooky action at a distance. How are things affecting each other from millions of light years away, which science has found? How can we affect each other from a distance through perhaps prayer? And we know the feeling, the vibration, vibes, the energy that we get when we're around either tense people or happy people or joy. What's that about? It's an instantaneous reaction. And so there's a spiritual connection that's always happening, energetic, and yet we've never actually touched. Another reason the world's an illusion. Try that again tomorrow. When you're walking down the steps, you're actually floating down the steps. And it's just a fun way to loosen up the mind, okay? Einstein proved 100 years ago that space and time aren't what we think they are. They're relative. Space and time change. We could go into that for hours. Oh, I couldn't. You could look that up online. But my understanding of it, again, is really simple. Space and time change for each individual observer based upon their movement and their relative experience in it. And there's, it's called time dilation and length contraction. And again, this concept's been around for 100 years. It should be taught in 3rd grade, in my opinion. So kids can grow up knowing this stuff. So space and time change, what that means is every one of us has our own relative experience of the physical world. We already talked about how there's really not one universe. For all 8 billion of us, we have our own little experience of this game that we're in. Mine's relative to yours because I'm looking at you and you're looking at me. So right there's a difference, okay? And yet Einstein proved the only thing that's consistent in all of this is the light. What a great metaphor, okay? It's a superb concept that the light is always consistent because it's the spirit ultimately that's always consistent. Einstein didn't say that. I'm extrapolating, but that's the point. Physical, not consistent. Spiritual, consistent. I love the concept of time, what Einstein called an illusion directly. He said time's an emerging phenomenon. Time emerges inside of a system, he says. And he described time as much more of a distance than anything else. Man conceives of it the wrong way. That's why it's an illusion. Time isn't what we think it is. Time is like this Pac-Man game again. The beginning of the game, the middle of the game, the end of the game, it's all in code right here, right? Every DVD or any movie you've ever watched, it's already been produced for you. And yet it all exists right there on the DVD. So the beginning, the middle, and the end, they all exist right here, right now. Well, guess what? We're in the same exact thing. We're experiencing a linear process through our particular, what we call time, our experience of time. And yet from the above perspective, from the spiritual perspective, it's completely different. As it says in Scripture, in heaven, a day is as 1,000 years, you know that verse, right? It's a different perception of time altogether. So time is an emerging phenomenon. I'll explain it like this. If you go into a football stadium and you see the clock up there and it says 14:53, 14:52, 14:51, you know that's a game clock. That's a kind of time that keeps track of how long the game is. Then you look over there and you see another clock on 23, 22, 21, and that's a play clock, because a play is a little subset of the game itself. So there's 2 different types of time. And you ask me what time it is. I guess it's 22. Now it's 21. That doesn't make any sense. That's for the game clock. That's the play clock. Is it 14:53 or 14:52? No, that's the time for the game that is only present right here for a little bit. And yet I look over there and it says 1:37. Well, guess what that means? That's the actual clock of the time of day. Okay? 3 different types of time inside a system that emerged when kickoff happened. Now what happens when the game ends? What happens to the clock? It disappears. That time doesn't exist anymore, right? It doesn't exist at all. Does it make sense to say how much time is left in the Steelers game when they got done playing a couple weeks ago? It doesn't exist at all. There's no time left. Well, that one type of time that we're so used to, that includes things like our age, it's only relevant in the emerging phenomenon that we are right here, right now, playing this game. And when we over-identify with that, I'm my age or whatever, and I'm running out of time, that's a delusion. That's an important part of that. If you over-focus on that, does it feel better when you get older and you start to go, oh, no, I'm running out of time? What's happening to my character? Right? That's deluded thinking. It's not true thinking. And yet, in the game, it's true, but the point of the spirituality of things is to give you this access to this other type of thinking and being. You have a higher dimensional self. And that higher dimensional self is having an experience of your lower dimensional self. Time was described by Einstein as the 4th dimension because it's spatial. The 5th dimension is where we come from spiritually, and we're down here in the 3rd dimension playing this game. If you don't know any of that, all the illusory stuff, then you're stuck in the 3rd dimension, and then you think you're getting older, and then you die. It says right up in the beginning of the Tao Te Ching, if you think you're a body, you will surely die. When you know you're not a body, you can never die. That's another relevant application of the illusion. Once you stop seeing yourself as physical, now death becomes something different. It's quite useful. Okay? We could go on. There's a lot more than that, okay? But that's hopefully sufficient for now to dive into the spirituality of things. So I've got 5 spiritual concepts to back up the illusion. This probably is my all-time favorite. It comes from the Vedas, which is a Hindu text. And it's this: a sleeping person imagines an alternate reality for himself and, seeing himself as having various names and forms, forgets his waking identity. You fall asleep at night, you have a dream. I once had a dream in which I met SpongeBob. Okay? So in my dream, I'm actually meeting SpongeBob, the character. So is Steve's is there in bed? Is he not experiencing SpongeBob? But in my dream, I was. Now, while I was in the dream, I forgot who Steve was. All of a sudden, I'm like talking to SpongeBob, and I thought that was real. And the teaching goes on. Your waking identity is now distinct from the dream. You're having a separation experience. Similarly, the senses of one whose consciousness is bewildered by illusion perceives only the names and forms of material objects. Our consciousness is bewildered by illusion. If we're bewildered by all the stuff we just talked about, we're just going to go sleepwalking through the dream, right? And we are going to pay attention to names and forms of material objects. That would be like me right now telling you, I met SpongeBob, he's real, okay? I met him, I shook his hand, okay? You'd be like, dude, that was a dream. That's what we're doing right now, okay? If you fall for the forms, if that's what we're falling for, not that it's not important, it's incredibly important. But if you fall for the forms and we don't have access to the higher self, we're now bewildered, like this teaching says. And so noticing the distinction between the ultimate waking identity. The ultimate waking identity is knowing you're a spiritual being. Like I said, that's capital W woke. That's the ultimate in wokeness, right? To go, I get it. We all are one, okay? And we're all having a separation experience, but we have to learn how to see the unity in it. That's the game that we're playing. It's a lot more fun if everyone plays along. So, that is the Hindu concept. Hindus teach Maya, which means literally illusion. And that the world is Maya. That's what they teach. So we're in an illusion. They said it's like fundamental to Hinduism. And the game that we're playing is called Leela. And we're in a play. Our spirit, if you will, is having this experience in this physical world. It's called Leela because we're in this illusion called Maya. I mean, it's a deep core part of their teaching. And their Vedas, again, teaches that directly. Buddhist philosophy. Now, I call this a therapy quote of the Buddhas because, once again, there's so many fake Buddha quotes out here. Anything that's detachment and allowing and, somehow Buddhist-oriented people go, the Buddha said that. Well, I didn't find, any proof that he said this line specifically, but it does broadly touch on most of his teachings. And it's very therapeutic. Buddha was alleged to have said that a wise man, recognizing that the world is an illusion, does not act as if it is real, so he escapes suffering. Now let's explain that. Suffering is different than sadness, okay? We're going to have sad experiences, but suffering is when we have sadness to the max, okay? And none of us like to do that, and yet all of us go through it. Buddha says we all are going to suffer. But he says you don't have to suffer. And again, this is for everyone. We only suffer because of the extent of our belief in the illusion. Once you know that it's, quote, just a dream, or just a game, or whatever, and that it's a temporary experience, that shifts things. And that's why the illusion is very useful. Now you're like, all right, this isn't very fun, and I don't like it when Pac-Man gets killed by a ghost either. But it shifts things. Jesus was purported to have said in one of the Gnostic texts, once you understand the purpose of suffering, you can no longer suffer. Literally, the awareness of it makes suffering go away. This doesn't mean you're not going to be sad in a lot of the human emotions. It's still going to be there. But suffering itself shifts. And the Buddha says, when you know that it's just an illusion, the suffering shifts. Because this isn't really who you are. It is who you are temporarily, which is what his very specific teachings called anatta. What that's specifically about is the illusion of the self. Now that's about as big as you can get in all of this. All right, trying to grasp that the world's an illusion, I can sort of get that because it's out there. But when the Buddha teaches, well, you know what else is an illusion? You. Right? Try that one on. Pretty respected dude, this Siddhartha, right? And he says, you're also an illusion, not just the world. And the goal of the Buddhist philosophy and his Eightfold Path and all his teachings is to learn what the heck that means. Now, I can do it simply, and I love to do this in therapy with people, but the basic idea is most of what we are is conditioned experiences. I was planted in Western Pennsylvania, right? I was given this male white body. And so my life got oriented in that direction. And all the experiences I had when I was 1, 2, 3, 4, all of that, guess what? I wasn't controlling any of it. It was happening to me, including my language and my religion and these things. And it's not. But then when I'm 7, 8, 9, I started then, I am Steve. I'm white boy. Go Steelers. I'm a Christian. Those types of things. I didn't decide any of that. It was taught to me.
And same thing with you. Buddha called it conditioned ignorance. And so much of the illusion of the self in this concept is that most of what we are is conditioning. And if you'd like to change that, because otherwise we're the walking dead. Remember, I've said this a lot recently. One of my favorite snarky Jesus lines. Let the dead tend to the dead. Right? He's literally talking about human beings who think physical beings are dead, and that's like a tragic thing. Now listen, I'm mocking it a little bit, okay? It's Jesus that said it though. Why? Because he was referring to the spiritually dead in that particular verse. And at the end, we talk about what Jesus did to demonstrate that it's an illusion too. The dead he's referring to are spiritually dead, and it changes the idea of what it means when Jesus rose Lazarus from the dead too. We're dead spiritually when we believe the illusion, when we think of it as primary. If we think of it as our permanent home, Buddha taught that it's a temporary place. It can't be the ultimate reality. And if we lead with it as primary, well, guess what? We're stuck in the illusion. We might as well be called dead because we are spiritually dead. But to rise up in spirit, to be awakened in spirit, is to get past the idea of the false self or the illusory self. That's anatta. In Islam, Quran 3:185, Muhammad reveals that, he says very specifically, that what we are here is enjoying delusion. Okay? We're enjoying this delusion. What's delusion? It's a deceptive experience, meaning it's not what we think it is. Well, we're sure down here trying to have fun in it, aren't we? Okay? That's the goal. And he's like, and he says so many great verses in the Quran. I recommend people read it. Don't read it from an open-minded perspective, not from the Christian focused perspective of it. Do it like a peacemaker. And I would suggest that Muslims do the same with the Bible. Let's do it in the spirit of cooperation here, because all your prophets are saying the same thing. The world isn't what you think it is. And Muhammad's emphasizing the idea that we're just down here grappling with the delusion and trying to enjoy it. Right? And Rumi, I will say Rumi is like the Apostle Paul to Jesus. Rumi is like that to Muhammad. He explains it so well. One of my favorite all-time teachings. Rumi said, this place is just a dream, but only a sleeper thinks it's real. Then death comes like the dawn, and you wake up laughing at your grief. That's pretty on point, okay? Only a sleeper thinks this world is real. Once again, changes the word awakening. And if you think the world's real, then you're missing the illusion of all of it. All the science of it and all the spiritual teachings of it. If you wake up laughing at your grief, that's such a harsh thing to say to someone, right? Rumi said it, I didn't. Okay, I'm just quoting him and trying to explain what he means by that. Because if this is just a dream and we experience all this suffering and you wake up and you're in this heavenly place, you go, oh my gosh, I fell for it. How many times do I have to go to earth, fall for the thing, try to experience delusion, have all this suffering, blame others for it, escape it, get back home again and go, I fell for it again. And you know what we tend to do when we get there? Let's go back. Let's go back again and experience that again. And most of the philosophies of the world support that. That, yeah, you come back again. Heck, Jesus demonstrated you can leave and come back, didn't he? Right? His resurrection? He came back. And so it's there as a possibility, but I'd like to say, just psychologically speaking, if what we're doing is experiencing a world that we think is real, we will suffer more. Now, I'm not suggesting that we laugh now at our grief. I'm not saying that. Rumi said, when you die, you'll wake up laughing at it. Because the Tibetan Book of the Dead says when you die, you'll have instantly 9 times more consciousness, 9 times more awareness. As soon as you're out of the system, because again, what if I think a football game is actually happening in a real way, and I'm out there trying to fight the football players? You guys stop being so mean to each other. Or I'm watching a movie, and I see a shooting, and I call the cops because, oh, something bad happened on that screen, okay? I'm not understanding that it's just an illusion, is that movie or is that football game. But we have to access the spirit while we're here. We do that by awakening. Then the truth comes into us, and now we can play this game better. Now we can have authentic compassion. Now we can have authentic true love, I like to say, right? Where we can look at each other and say, listen, let's wake up together. That's called empathy. You still have the feelings, but now you're doing it with spirit, which is why the prophets are all teaching it. So here, Christianity, Proverbs 14:18. Now, I like to say, this is important, I chose that version because it's specific explanation, or it's a specific translation. Foolish dreamers live in a world of illusion. Now, that's the only translation of that particular verse that says illusion, but I chose that one for obvious reasons, okay? Foolish dreamers live in a world of illusion. It's precisely what Rumi was just saying, and what Muhammad was saying, and what Buddha and the Hindus said we have to learn how to get past. Right? Pretty important, given all the science that says it's an illusion. Well, man, we better deal with this illusion thing. Foolish dreamers live in a world of illusion. Well, what did Jesus himself demonstrate? Like almost every aspect of his being. And through the lens of illusion, go read the Bible, it becomes so much more clear. He's trying to teach that to you. He says, or it was said of him, he never spoke without a metaphor. He never spoke without a parable. All his teachings about the fishing of things, right? And the experience of the world when you were trying to be a fisher of men. Did he mean that literally, or is it just some sort of metaphor? Well, the physical world is a metaphor for the spiritual one. And we are down here playing with spirit with each other. That's all true. It's all Leela. We're doing that. But it's metaphorical. It's as above, so below, as Hermes taught. Or Kabbalah teaches the world of causes and the world of effects. We're in the world of effects right now. And so Jesus was a master of all these teachings. Teaching as above, so below. Talking about it in the Lord's Prayer, on earth as it is in heaven, okay? I'm not of this world, I'm of the next world. Things like that. My father's mansion, my father's house has many rooms, or my father's mansion has many rooms. He's talking about superposition. Forgive them, they know not what they do. How many people do you know that know this world's an illusion and operate that way? Right? But if you know that it's an illusion, that's going to be a game shifter. And you're going to go straight to what people who have that awakening, the experience is, oh my gosh, I need to be more compassionate, not less. Knowing that's an illusion doesn't make you quit the game. It makes you want to play the game better. That's why the Buddha was criticized for his detachment. And yet he says, that's not what it is. You love deeper, because now you don't love with attachment. We know, heck, what do we call it in therapy? It's called codependence. If all we're doing is loving people, if they give love back to us, what does Jesus say? Loving your friends? That doesn't do anything. That's easy to do. Love your enemies? That's a challenge. That's how you succeed in this anatta experience, and you get past the illusion of things by actually loving the thing that the ego doesn't want to love. And if you see it that way, now you're literally walking in the steps of Jesus, which he said you had to do. Not literally, spiritually speaking. Pick up your cross and carry it. So I could go on and on. All his teachings are about learning how to break free from the conditioned self. Last one. The origin of consciousness, which we started with, it's quite useful to think of what's the origin of consciousness in a dream. To me, that answers the debate between the scientist and the philosopher in the first place. Think of your dream at night. Think of any dream you've ever had, and if I were to say to you, what's the origin of the consciousness in that dream? Is it the dreamer itself? When I'm talking to SpongeBob, is that where my consciousness is? Or where's my actual consciousness? In my higher self, laying in bed. It's not in the dream, is it? So the origin of consciousness is not in the dream. And scientists are trying to find the origin of consciousness in the dream. Everything that we just talked about, it's just a dream. So there's a nursery rhyme we all know. Row, row, row your boat gently down the stream. Right there, it tells you how to do it. Gently. Your boat, by the way, is this vessel. Rowing is movement, and we have to experience it. Gently, and then how? Merrily. A spirit of merrily down the stream. Why? Life is but a dream. So what's the origin of consciousness? Well, it's not here. It has to be somehow outside the dream. It's why life is an illusion, and it's why we indoctrinate children with truth with that nursery rhyme, ultimately, okay? Life is but a dream.